Yeah, so our next speaker, in case anyone hasn't guessed already, it is Conor Moore. Conor believes in the potential of co-living to facilitate meaningful human connections and positively change the way the world lives. With the goal of empowering the global co-living movement, Conor is involved in initiatives across the co-living industry. Head of content at CoLive, live-in house leader for a 63-bed co-living location in Brooklyn, and a real estate analyst with Nomos Group. Conor also runs Co-Living Corner, a website dedicated to his cross-continental co-living journey. That's easy to say. So without any further ado, I'll hand straight over to Conor and he can take it from there.
There you go. Thank you guys so much for having me. Before we get started, Niall, I think the gingerbread man, I always think of that scene with the not the gumdrop buttons in Shrek,
Yes.
which is probably one of the best of all time. And Van, I saw you that you're a monster. Hilarious scene. But okay, awesome. I guess I need to be a host. Oh no, yeah, here we go. Share screen. All right, let me know if you guys can see it. I think we should be good to go. Okay, here we go. So today I'll be giving a presentation, if it loads here, here we go, on the power of small gatherings. And so I think a lot of times this picture on the right is what New York looks like around the holidays for New Year's or the ball dropping. I don't think we're gonna have that this year. I think the picture on the left might be more of what we'll be doing with our, kind of smaller groups of, your quarantine bubble of family or friends or whatever it is. But certainly excited. I think first off, Tom, I haven't met you before, but that was an excellent presentation. I really enjoyed the kind of research side of things, and we're definitely going to bring in some research to this today. But love kind of the deep dive that you had there. So yeah, so looking at small gatherings. So I guess first we can kind of do a little bit about me. So for school, I spent some time at Duke University in North Carolina over here in the States, studying public policy and social entrepreneurship. And then actually got to spend the last 2 years over in Malaysia, which the kind of traveling piece, I guess, was well timed before everything kind of closed down this year. But really enjoyed that experience, getting to travel all around. And during that, I also had the chance to visit a ton of co-living places. So got to see properties in Bali, pictured up here in the top right. Got to go to, Singapore, Korea, Japan, China, India. Really got to see a lot of different co-living places in different countries. And I also started a research blog called Co-Living Corner. So you can check that out at some point. And then looking at what I've got involved in post-graduation, it was kind of a bizarre year to graduate, as you can imagine. I think all the 2020 grads were imagining a different global economy, but here we are. I think most of us have landed on our feet here. But so I've actually, as an associate at Nomos Group, and Stony, I believe, is on the call as well. My partner in crime and boss up in New York, which is where I've been working for the past few months. And then as well have had a role at CoLive. I think everyone knows Kate and the whole CoLive team. So it's been awesome working as the head of content there. A shameless plug, I suppose, for one of our recent projects called Co-Living Resources. If you want to check that out at some point, it's a big kind of consolidation of a lot of the most relevant research and kind of co-living resources out there. I've done a good amount of podcasts, panels, presentations. It's early, but so far, I think my favorite one is Co-Living Christmas. And down to the bottom bullet here, which I think is probably the most important, is looking at my favorite Christmas gift. It wasn't this one over here on the right. I couldn't get an exact picture of it, but similar idea when I was 5, got a kind of race car with pedals. And my older brother, who's 2 years older than me, I think he was 7 at the time I was 5, didn't get one. And so the first thing he said was, "Oh, wow, Conor, we can share, right?" And so that's, I guess, is just the classic siblings watching other people open Christmas gifts. And then this year, my wish list, and this isn't, I guess, my wish list, but my mom told me that she'll be getting me an electric toothbrush this year. So I guess times have changed from being 5 years old and being 28. Christmases are a little bit different. Okay, we can hop in here now. So looking at co-living, this slide obviously is not new for anybody that's on this call. Co-living is about community, right? And so I think being able to facilitate a strong community is obviously a key part of all co-living companies' value propositions. If you look at, this is just some of the language that you'll see on basically any co-living company's website, whether it's, Quarters, mostly in Europe, Hamlet, one of the bigger players in Southeast Asia, and then Star City over here in the US. All of these places are talking about human gatherings, right? Sure, we can call it community, but when it comes down to it, community is either physical, hopefully, here in 2021, but can be virtual gatherings as well, right? But the idea is that it's all about connecting people, right? It's designed to encourage connection and collaboration. It's a put your phone down, have a conversation kind of place, right? So in other words, the best co-living companies out there are the ones that will facilitate the best gatherings. And so the presentation today is kind of going over how can we facilitate the best gatherings possible. And so here, and there's so many different factors in hosting an excellence gathering, right? And so it can be down to purpose. It can be looking at the location, timing, size. I'm going to throw in a bunch of just really bad jokes throughout the presentation, so just be prepared. Is there eggnog there? So I think that's like another thing. Is it going to be a great event, right? But the one that we're going to focus on today is just looking at the size of the gathering, right? So what is the best size of a gathering to achieve the goal, right? So I think when we kind of dive into some of the research here, so we look at kind of three different perspectives. The first one here is going to be the academic perspective. So there's been a good amount of research by a lot of sociologists and even like business researchers out there that are looking at what is the most effective meeting size, right? And a meeting is just another word for a gathering. Typically, it happens in a business setting, right? But a lot of the research out there from Harvard professor Richard Hackman, who has spent basically over 3 decades looking at the inner workings of teams and what is the most effective way for humans to communicate. And his rule of thumb is no double digits. Kind of looking at Stanford professor Robert Sutton, he basically has a very similar kind of takeaway, is that the most productive teams have between 5 and 8 people. So this is the academic perspective. When we look at the business perspective, I know Tom mentioned Jeff Bezos quote. We've got another one here, kind of looking at the Amazon 2 pizza rule. So this one is that if you can't feed a meeting with 2 pizzas, it's too large, right? And so basically the idea here is that, and also Elon Musk, the Mars rocket man that Tom mentioned as well, has been quoted in a lot of different YouTube videos and interviews, saying that any meeting that's like larger than 4 to 6 people is a waste of people's time. And so we have a lot of business leaders. We have a lot of academics out there saying that these small gatherings, these small meetings, are more effective and more efficient. But what about and so I guess here's kind of why. And when you look at the research, it kind of distills to 2 main reasons why these smaller gatherings are better, right? And so the first one is participation, right? If a meeting is too large, if we have 150 people on a company call, there's obviously not going to be enough time for everybody to participate, right? And so if you're not participating, or if you're not actively participating in a meeting or a gathering, maybe that's better communicated in an email or a video that is sent out afterwards, right? You don't necessarily need to be in the time and space if you're not participating in the meeting at all, right? And the second part, which I think is more important for when you're trying to create meaningful connections in a co-living environment, is authenticity, right? One of the #1 fears of people in the entire world is public speaking. And I think the idea there is that when you're in front of such a large people, or you're in a meeting that's 30 people, or your entire department, a lot of times people become more guarded and like way less candid. If you're in a meeting with one of your bosses, or just a ton of other people, you're not going to be your authentic self, right? And so a lot of times the rigorous back and forth debate, where a lot of the best innovation and like best ideas can come from, is replaced by kind of guarded comments and kind of, oh, well, I'm not going to say this because everybody is in this meeting, right? Okay, so let's bring that to the social perspective, which I think is most relevant for our discussion today. Kind of setting the scene with academic and the business perspective, which a lot of times is where most of the research is, because if you can have a more effective business meeting, a lot of times you can affect the bottom line. So companies are willing to pay millions and millions of dollars to find out how do we have better gatherings. But when we bring it to a social perspective, by far, I think the best book on this, and honestly the one that kind of got me on this whole idea of how important gatherings are, is The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker. Absolutely amazing book if you're looking for something to sit by the fire and sip your hot cocoa and read a book. Would for sure recommend The Art of Gathering. But she mentions basically very, very similar ideas in that smaller gatherings, even when they're social, lead to higher participation rates, as well as allow people to be authentic, as we've mentioned. But the phrase that she uses that I really love is that it allows us to leave our best self at home. And it might sound counterintuitive because of course we might want our best self in business meetings and gatherings with friends and family. But the idea here is that a lot of times, think about when you're networking at a conference, right? The typical conferences, oh, hi, I'm Connor. This is what I do as a job, and here's my background. And you might just be trying to not impress people, but bring your best self, right? So that later on, maybe you can network with these folks or have some kind of business. But Parker is basically saying that by leaving our best self at home, we can kind of get to more meaningful relationships, either in a business or a social sense, more quickly, right? And so when we have these smaller social gatherings, if we have 5 people at a dinner, I am much more likely to, tell an embarrassing story or, have something that will really create a connection, right? And so looking at kind of the magic number that Parker mentions in The Art of Gathering, she mentions that if you want a lively but inclusive conversation as a core part of your gathering, 8 to 12 people is a number you should consider. So obviously all of these different researchers and everything have different numbers, but typically if you're looking at a small social gathering size, almost all of the research that I've done out there, none of it has a number that's larger than 15. Okay, so this is basically looking at the keys to co-living gatherings or even business gatherings as well. Honestly, the biggest takeaway from the book and the biggest takeaway you should take away from today is kind of looking at the size of your gathering is basically should totally relate to its purpose and its goals. So it's not to say that large gatherings or large business meetings or anything like that are bad, but they just need to be tailored to what you're trying to achieve, right? And so if you want to host a gathering where people are their authentic selves and will create meaningful relationships, which I think is basically the goal of a lot of co-living operators, is to have these folks that are living in their environments get to know each other and really change the living experience. Don't host a large gathering, right? On the flip side of that, if you're wanting to have a year-end event to celebrate the achievements of the entire company or an entire co-living community across a city, you probably won't be having those this year, but you can imagine when we can, this gathering would need to be large, right? Of course, because you're celebrating a lot of people. It wouldn't make sense to celebrate the achievements of an entire company and only invite 5 people. So kind of bringing it back to co-living, this is kind of the last slide we'll go over here before going into questions and then kind of a small activity that we have. So I think a lot of times there's this kind of dilemma almost between co-living operators. These were some of the pictures that I was able to take while I was traveling the world of co-living last summer. It was absolutely amazing. But there's kind of this dilemma between the left side of the screen and the right side of the screen, where you have these small co-living operators. This is a small co-living company in San Diego, California, called Living Q. And they have about 20 to 30 people at each of their properties. And then this one down here is actually at a small co-living company in Bali, Indonesia, called Hustlers Villa. And whenever I visited these small co-living communities, their level of community was amazing. You walk in the door and you automatically feel like you're a part of the crew, a part of the team. And then you look over on the right side of the screen. This one up here is actually the We Live location on Wall Street. So I think it's over $3,000 a month to stay there, which is kind of wild. But you look, like look at how many washers and dryers there are. They even have ping pong tables and, the pool tables here while you're, I don't know, coming to pick up your laundry, which is kind of wild. And then here is a location in Los Angeles, California at C1, which is a Star City location. But the idea is that when you have 150 people in a building, or you have, just massive locations like this, it can be difficult to create strong communities and to basically have those small gatherings, right? If you have a happy hour at one of these places, maybe there's going to be 50 people that come, right? If you have one over here, it'll be a backyard barbecue feel with, 8 or 10 people, right? Having said that, I think it's important to recognize that even if you do have a large co-living company, or you have, 50 different houses like across London that, have 5 or 10 people, or, 5 or 6 people in each of them, you can still intentionally create small gatherings, right? It might be a little more difficult because you do have so many people in the building, but you can also, I guess, intentionally create programming to help create these small gatherings in the hopes of being able to facilitate more meaningful human connections. All right, so that was the kind of quick dive in here. So now we're going to do a fun little breakout room session. I feel like I would be remiss if I did a presentation on small gatherings and we didn't have some kind of small gathering involved in here. So here's what we're going to do, I think, with the help of Matt. Hopefully we can sort into breakout rooms of around 3 or 4 people. You'll have around 5 total minutes as a group to go over 3 things for this year, right? So one is looking at a rose, which is looking at the best thing that happened to you in 2020. And it can be one of the best things that happened to you. So no, all of us can't choose co-living Christmas events. And then I think as well, the second thing we'll have to go over is the thorn. So looking at maybe, one of the worst things that happened to you this year, right? And I think this is part of being authentic and being able to share and connect with people. And then we'll close on a good note with number 3, which is looking at a rosebud. So something that you're looking forward to for 2021. And just to avoid confusion, whoever alphabetically has the first name first will go first, and then we'll kind of go down the list to make sure that everyone gets a chance. So Matt, if you can sort us into some of those breakout rooms. And reminder, it's rose, thorn, and then rosebud. And we'll have around 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and answer any questions you guys have. Good. Yeah, no, it's like one of my favorites for sure. I know our room was great. Really enjoyed it. I think Van thought the time was going to run out at the end, but he did have to go anyway. So it was fun. Yeah, hopefully everyone enjoyed it. But yeah, that was the kind of the end of the small gatherings presentation. But yeah, if there's any questions or anything like that, I'm happy to answer it, or we can move on to the next one.
I think it was just, I don't have an answer. I'm sorry, I don't have a question. But I just it's more like a comment. I just wanted to say, I think maybe not just at the end of the year, but every so often is very important, to stop and really think about the questions that you asked, because we don't remember, right? You just do things and you just carry on in life, and then when someone stop you and ask you, actually, can you think about that? You really are made to think, and you understand, how much you've been doing, how much you've achieved, and maybe how much you look forward to what's next, instead of just being a bit down, especially in this year, right? Unprecedented year. Right? So yeah, I was just to say thank you for doing that, because it made me also kind of like stop and think. So thanks.
In regards to the, not about the hat, but actually just about the size of those co-living places, you talk a lot about, you've actually spoken about a co-living company that I actually, funny enough, I know, which is the Living Pew. I found them, that they are very, very leading, and I love to be able to copy them and actually implement what they do here in the UK. So what I didn't, and again, because of my problems with the connections, I didn't really get very, I must have missed some of the presentation, but are you an operator yourself, or are you a loving person that has just moved around the globe on co-living and obviously has a wealth of information and knowledge about this ecosystem?
Yeah. So I think more towards the second part there. So I don't operate a co-living place of my own, but have basically after living in a bunch of shared hostels or like shared living environments at some co-living places, have just absolutely fallen in love with the concept. And so through working with Co-Live and certainly, you know, like starting to work with Matt and Niall and like team over there, and just involved in a lot of different co-living initiatives. And so that's kind of where I've, you know, kind of like dove down some rabbit holes of reading a bunch of books on gatherings or, you know, how we can best facilitate community. And so that's kind of where a lot of the information from today came from. But yeah, if that answers your question.
No, that's fantastic, because what I was going to say then, obviously, because you have all the experience that I unfortunately experienced the old system, HMO system, and that was really awful. That's why I bought into the way forward. But yeah, so in your experience, when you are looking into those small clusters of up to 8 people, I guess, and this is something that Matt and I also, you know, they also speak about just having big houses, but they just have smaller clusters of flats and things like that. So what is the ideal that you've lived on? Is he 6? Is he 8? Is he 4? Because my ones are always 4 to 5. I don't have any bigger any bigger co-living spaces than 5, because I think that I don't know how to operate them. I think it's too big at the moment. But what is the ideal for you?
Totally. That's a fantastic question, and I think one that like the global co-living industry is still trying to answer. I could probably give an entire presentation just on that question, and I think to kind of go along the like research line, one of the things that I'll bring up and that I've found fascinating is one of the papers that I read was by actually a British sociologist named Robin Dunbar. So you guys may have heard of Dunbar's number, which is like around 150. Which is supposedly the like maximum number of meaningful connections that a human can have at one time. And it's based on just like the size of our brain, like what we can remember and how we can associate with people. But he actually has this model. It's called the social brain theory. If you guys want to look it up, it's absolutely fascinating. And the idea is that it's kind of modeling how humans form relationships, and it's in these rings, right? So the idea is that you have around 5 maybe people in your like closest ring that are your friends, maybe like your closest friends and your direct family maybe. Then you have this next ring that is around 15. Then you have another ring that's 45. And then the last ring is around 150, right? So this idea is that we have these rings of relationships, whether it's our, you know, closest friends that are 5, maybe our next closest, you know, kind of friends that we maybe interact with on a weekly or monthly basis, it's around 15 people. And then we have this kind of third ring that's around 50 people, right? That maybe it's our coworkers, people we see once a month. And so like maybe like applying that theory to co-living, you can kind of have this idea of what you just mentioned, Raquel, is kind of looking at the clusters, right? So maybe we have a bunch of units or houses or flats that are, you know, 5 or 6 people in that first ring, right? Those are your roommates, they're the ones that you're closest with. Then maybe there's 3 kind of houses or flats in that neighborhood. Or if you're in a large building, maybe it's the 3 units on a floor that are then able to be that kind of second ring of around 15 people. And then maybe the entire building or all of the co-living community within a neighborhood is around 50, right? And of course, it's not going to match up completely correct. And I'm not saying that all of the people in the co-living should be their only friends. But I think if we start to look at the psychology of how humans form relationships, and then we base our co-living environments or our living environments in general based off of that psychology of how the human mind works, then hopefully we can start to create living solutions that are better aligned with how humans actually create relationships.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. Thank you. That is very, very insightful. Just tell me, what was the name again of this? I definitely want to read this paper. So what is
Yeah.
Robin?
So if you just Google Robin Dunbar, and it's the social brain theory, I believe. I'll post a link in the chat after this.
That would be
but
great.
really
Thank
fascinating.
you.
It's kind of like a dry academic paper, but it mentions like tons and tons of like proof kind of where these kind of rings existed, all the way back from like hunter-gatherer societies to how military is organized. He also looks at actually, this is hilarious. This is so fitting. One of the examples is Christmas cards sent out in the UK. So he looks at like who sends Christmas cards. The average person sends around 150 Christmas cards. So there's all of these, you know, interesting kind of numbers and evidence out there for a lot of these numbers. So,
Oh,
but
brilliant.
I would recommend reading the paper. It's really interesting.
Oh, thank you ever so much, Connor. Lovely talking to you.
I'd also recommend a couple of articles that Connor has written. So Connor, I don't know whether you want to share the links to those in the chat here, because Connor's very succinctly summarized a lot of this information in a couple of articles. Also,
Absolutely.
get the next version of Co-Living Insight, because that we talk about that in there as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I've already shared the co-living resources and a link to Connor's LinkedIn page on the chat already.
And also, as you were mentioning, I think in your presentation as well, Matt, earlier this morning, if someone maybe have missed it, in the next issue of the HMO magazine, there is going to be a special edition on co-living, which has been curated by Colive, and in collaborate, mainly it's been, overseen, the whole thing is being overseen by Connor. So if you need anything, just reach out to him. You can get your own copy. There's a lot of information. Many people who are on the call today, some of the speakers, but also some of the guests have been contributing to that. So thank you very much for it. And it's a fantastic resource for co-living, with a lot of information, a lot of researches, a lot of numbers, a lot of, how to move on, how to, go from HMO to home.
There you go.
My favorite terminology, my favorite one. I know. I stole that now. And I also want to say, I hope you guys don't mind me saying that. I would like to say hi to Stony. I feel very starstruck that you're here, and again, fantastic. I know the person who is super out there in co-living. So that
wow, thanks. And it's always so fun to hear your voice and your enthusiasm and accent and excitement and everything. I just love. It's in the morning, and we're on the East Coast, and I was going to tell a kind of a cute little anecdote as well about sort of forming community and this navigating this business about kind of virtual versus real community. And sort of interestingly, Connor and I met on one of these virtual events. And I think a lot of it also had to do with repetition. So actually seeing the same faces again and again, sort of beginning to understand how people think or how they interact. And so Connor and I, through the course of, I guess it was the spring, when everybody was really in lockdown, and then a little bit into the summer, got to know each other in these kind of forums. And then at the end of, I guess it would have been like around August or maybe July. And so he was living in Malaysia, and he said, hey, I know you're connected within the industry. Are there any, operators that you think I should join and, work as a executive or, something, or workers of some type? And we talked about all the different operators. And I just said, hey, Connor, I just love the way you think, and I love the way that you, your sort of devotion to space. What about joining us here at Nomos? And so I think, anyway, we then started working remotely, and then Connor actually moved to East Hampton, and we worked out of this office, which is, by the way, my garage that I've tried to make super fancy here. And then we we're in a bubble, kind of co-working, not co-living, I guess, but living as neighbors, for like 6 weeks. And now Connor's back with his family for the holidays. But I just thought that was kind of a fun, output of some of these meetings. And then, Raquel, to answer your question in terms of our perspective at Nomos, and we basically try to sit at a part of the ecosystem where we're helping various co-living operators and co-living owners to figure out how to capitalize their businesses or their real estate assets. And so, like the first group I was involved in was Open Door, which was one of the pioneers on the West Coast of the US. And I'm now on the board of directors of that. And I was the head of real estate there for a little while. And we found, as we experimented with some of our early houses, we had, a few that were, effectively kind of too small, we thought, like where they just felt too intimate. It felt like kind of like a family. And that was in kind of the 5 to 6 zone. And then we had one that was 16 people. And our finding on that was that with 16 people, you just couldn't quite remember, everybody's parents' name and everybody's significant other's name and everybody's, background and all that kind of thing. So those guys are always creating spaces that are between sort of 8 and 15 people to share a set of common spaces and a kitchen and dining and a, you know, living room and that kind of thing. And then as they've scaled up, because they've gone from, you know, these 3 lovely old mansions in Oakland to, I guess now 270 rooms or something across, you know, 14 properties in Portland and Bay Area and Seattle. And I think what they find is that to have the most effective community and culture, it's, you know, they have to divide those spaces into these groups of 8 to 15. And I think that at the big companies, which Connor and I also work with, Common, Ollie, I was an investor in and helped to sort of get off the ground. They've recently sold to Star City, but we work very heavily in with Common, and they have found that the magic number for them is 6 people actually sharing sort of intimate spaces like a kitchen, and then sort of having the neighbor pod of the 6 plus 6 be a community of 12. And then, as you've said, Connor, with those sort of circles or whatever concentric circles going out, you know, the buildings tend to be in that zone where you've got, you know, the building that we're working on now in LA has 112 bedrooms, you know, so that's just kind of at that verge of being, you know, too big, you know, so that it becomes anonymous, but you have your own little pod within that. So anyway, anecdotes from our perspective and fun times. So happy holidays to everybody. Great to meet you all.
Thanks for popping
Yeah,
in.
absolutely.
I mean, you know, you said you missed my voice, but I also missed you too. Those you know, those weekly co-living you know, little pop-up, which used to be like the COVID, let's get over the COVID and let's build a community, were really great.
And it was so nourishing, I thought, particularly during the really lonely days. So I think there's a lot of value in these.
I think it was what, you know, like you were saying, you know, the power of small gathering, and sometimes it was only 8 to 12 of us, and it was just good because people from all over the world, and you can see like we're going all through the same things and kind of like helping each other. It was really nice. Anyway, I'm gonna let people ask you a question now, Connor. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and if we're running low on time, Matt and Niall, I don't know if or whatever it is, but yeah, happy to answer anything else or chat with people offline too. So.
No, we are running on time. So you've got another, excuse me, 10, 15 minutes or so to answer any questions or whatever, if people have got queries for you.
Ooh, cool. And I will. I'm currently sending a few articles to the chat, so check that out for some of the stuff we've been talking about.
That's amazing. Cool. So if anybody does have any additional questions for Connor, please just raise your hand or just unmute yourself. Stunned silence.
We've answered all of the questions. Everything's been answered. So.
Everybody knows everything there is to know now.
I'm gonna ask you a question. Actually, I'm gonna. I say challenge, but maybe no, because you're never challenged anyway. What makes you so passionate about co-living? Because you are so passionate. Like, you know, when I met you was a few months ago as well. Like, I guess in some of the same gathering, and you know, we had a little chat for your co-living corner, and then I said, you know, you had to join co-live because your passion was so great. You know, why? What's your why? There you go.
You think I'm going to be a challenge question?
I'm going to quote Simon Sinek. What's your why?
No, absolutely. That's one of my favorite books for sure. No, but this is an easy one. This is an easy question to answer. So I think kind of when I kind of first got into communal living, I guess was when I was like traveling and like working abroad after I graduated. So I was living in New Zealand and Australia, and I was living in kind of longer term shared living situations. They were hostels, but it was kind of the same people were there. We were there for months at a time. And I think that's when I first was like, why can't we always live like this? Like, this is great. It's a bunch of interesting people. But I think like why I'm so passionate about it, I think kind of looking at, there's a lot of different like things we went over at business school as far as our like career path and stuff. And one of the concepts was called Ikigai, which is like the Japanese concept of purpose. And I remember seeing this graph, and it's really, really cool. So it's 4 concentric circles, or well, not totally concentric, but overlapping. And the 4 topics are what you love, what you're good at, what you can get paid for, and what the world needs. And I think like for me, co-living is in the dead center of that as far as like what I'm good at. Like obviously love like chatting with people. Like I probably love talking too much, as you guys can tell. But I think and then like, you know, kind of looking at like what you're good at, like what I studied in the past is social entrepreneurship and smaller teams and kind of being able to launch new business concepts. And then what the world needs. I think that in the time of cell phones and social media, I think we're more connected than ever, but we spend more time looking at these guys than we actually do other human faces. And so I think kind of going back to being the social creatures that we are of, you know, creating meaningful relationships and, you know, having, you know, like good connections with other people in a physical setting is something that I think the world definitely needs. And I think that we can for sure benefit from. And then as well, I guess, yeah, looking at what you can get paid for. I think that all of us right now on this call, we're probably at what I like to think of as the beginning of the co-living wave here. I think that once people really start to understand exactly what it is, we can take all of our HMOs and make them next level HMOs, if you will, Matt and I also, and hopefully kind of go into this co-living industry that I think will really take off. And I think if we can focus on the actual tenant experience and the member experience and build a great product, that what you can get paid for, the kind of financial returns will follow afterwards. So I think to succinctly kind of put it all up, I think as far as looking at what I want to do in my career, in my life, I think that co-living basically checks all of the boxes for me. So it's not really work if you enjoy it as much as I do. So that's hopefully answers your question, Kate.
Yeah, I think that's everybody's dream position, is to love what they do.
Absolutely.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Anybody else got any other questions? If not, we can.
Dan.
Yeah.
No, I wanted to ask something to Stonington, if that's okay, only because.
One second, sorry, Raquel. 1 second. Just Dan was just asking a question.
Did I beat you to it with my hand up raised there? Connor, I'm going to ask you a question specifically to the last 6 months and with COVID. No one's really mentioned it actually on this call, which is actually quite refreshing, to be frank. But how have you experienced that in the States and in co-living? And has it been a good thing or a bad thing in terms of learning and innovating?
Yeah. So I think kind of like anything, there's going to be some pros and cons for sure. I think that if at the beginning of the year, everyone was like, hey, like, do we want a pandemic to happen? No one would say yes, right? But I do think there are going to be some positives that will come out of it. So I was actually living in a co-living place in Brooklyn for about 6 weeks at Outpost Club and kind of working and living there. And so I did get to kind of see, okay, what does co-living look like during a pandemic? And I think that, you know, and now that we've seen there's been a few kind of co-living operators that have, you know, kind of gone belly up because of the, you know, they've signed master leases and they can't kind of keep up with the occupancies, which is obviously not great. But I think overall, perhaps unsurprisingly, I have a pretty biased view on the industry, but I think overall, co-living globally, certainly here in the US, has responded much, much better than anyone would have imagined. I think on the surface level, a lot of my friends were like, hey, Connor, like, you're interested in co-living, which is like basically predicated on bringing people together face to face. Like, is this just done? And I think on the surface level, it's easy to see that, but beneath the surface, and I actually wrote an article on this as well that I can send out. I think it's kind of interesting to look at, like, economically, socially, how co-living has responded. And I think economically, I think co-living is going to be stronger kind of in the future because of a lot of times higher density solutions lead to more like lower price points as compared to studios in the same markets. And then as well socially, right? Like if you have a studio apartment in Manhattan, you know, when it was really at a peak there, that's tough, right? Like, you know, for a month period, like that's really difficult. So I think, you know, and basically, and so Stony likes to say this all the time, like, you know, being in a 5-person apartment building is basically the same as what I'm doing right now, which is I'm with my sister and my mom and dad, right? So it's basically, you know, you're kind of quarantining with your little group, but your family kind of becomes your roommates rather than your family. And so I think that obviously it's been tough, but I think the like co-living companies that will come through this and come out the other side will be much stronger. And a lot of the core principles that made co-living attractive in the first place, you know, community, affordability, convenience will only be even stronger once we get all this behind us. So, yeah. And Raquel, I think you had a question next.
Yes, well, it was a question for Stonington, really. It was more of a practical question, and it's only because he acknowledged something that I thought it was worth exploring a little bit more. And in terms of this new project that you guys are working on, this 112 bedrooms building, you said that you are clustering up in smaller units. And can I just ask, from the practical point of view, is this something that you're clustering as in flats, and then or some sort of floors, and then there is open space for everyone to move in? Even again, I'm just trying to just put something in physical. I'm a very visual person, so I kind of like need some sort of image in my head, and I just don't know how you can put 121 persons there and then just be a cluster, because to me that's a nightmare.
Yeah, totally. No, happy to dive into it. Hopefully I won't get too sort of granular on the plans and bore anyone also. But in your background, Raquel, is it in design you said, or in what's your background or your sort of perspective?
No. I am already a landlord. I've been in the industry for 15 years. I do have a large portfolio, and I have recently started more and more in co-living. So although my cluster as it is in London, actually I'm looking to expand it into other main cities in the country. So the ideal is to move it to Birmingham and then Edinburgh, and just big cities in the UK. But my stuff is all in London, and it's all very small. As I said, it's 4 or 5 guys were living together. Normally they look for their own. It works on a very, very similar principles to what you're saying, because it is tenant led. The tenant actually get to choose their own people, but it's very customer focused. It's very, very tenant led, but it's not on a large scale, and that's what I'm very, very keen to expand.
Yeah, so it's funny, that's exactly, I think, the tension, right? Which is fundamentally, at least my observation, working across this sort of spectrum is I think that you have on the one end of the spectrum, really, really beautiful, sort of meaningful, amazing cultures that form that are very sort of idiosyncratic and special. And we find that in our open door houses, where there's like, one of the houses on International Boulevard primarily, which is a little less expensive, primarily has attracted people that are in the food industry. And that's a thing that they, has a particularly well outfitted kitchen so that they can do a lot of cooking. And another one is, has tended to attract more sort of an entrepreneurial crowd. And then there's a third that's more of a sort of a crafts and art kind of sensibility to it. And that formed very organically through the, I don't want to say the master tenant, but we have somebody that typically activates the community and then helps to sort of curate their roommates effectively. And so that's the culture piece. And then it goes all the way to the other end of the spectrum, which to me is effectively like corporate housing, right? And I actually think that a lot of the big institutional groups in the US, fall into that category, Common being one of them, to be honest, where primarily they're looking for how do we get a higher, return on investment on a per foot basis and on a net operating yield basis by virtue of having a higher density building. And I think that the cultural element, to be honest, is less emphasized. And I think that that's okay. I think there will be a real spectrum of operators. And I think that, certain types of products will appeal to certain types of consumers. Not everybody, wants to have such a communal, intimate experience like you have at many of the open door places. But that area in the middle, I think, is hard to navigate, right? Which is going from a small, intimate community to something where you can achieve some degree of economies of scale, and therefore sort of improve your operating margins and hire a team and make more money, right? So that you can sort of sustain this thing. And so that's Open Door has been this idea of having pods within the buildings. But to be honest with you, as we think about the 112 unit building on Venice Boulevard in LA, I would say the emphasis is not as much on having an intimate community. The intimate community forms more organically within the apartments. So the apartments themselves are 6-bedroom apartments. And that's basically just an output of the zoning laws in LA. And so I think both our client, which is Six Peak, I'm a senior advisor, but they're our client as well, Six Peak Capital, which is one of the few sort of private equity firms that's focused on this space in the US. I think they come at it they see co-living as a very attractive economic opportunity because you do make more money on a per foot basis. And they come generally from a more real estate style background. And I come from more of a real estate finance background. So I think the way a typical developer thinks about a site is they look at it and they figure out what can be built on it. And then they're just turning the Rubik's Cube as to like, what does this want to be as its highest and best use? And it may be that that's, 3-bed, 2-bath apartments because it's really a family oriented area, or it may be that it's, micro studios. But in this case, we were like, we'd love to build, like effectively micro studios, but it's not allowed by the zoning. And so we went, let's do these 6-bedroom apartments where you can have this, intimate group that falls right between that 5 and 8, right? That Connor talked about. Mm-hmm. And I think, when you think about the 12-unit neighbor things, it's more like, who do you actually organically get to know by virtue of where you are in the space, rather than having it be a heavily intentional clustering of 15 people, like it is in Open Door. Open Door is truly like, they have a very regimented ratio of, open space to private space. And they've, lived through really optimizing, again, this is too much detail. So I'll stop right after this comment, but they've determined that you want to have spaces where the whole community can gather. That's typically over food. I think that community evolves over mutually fulfilling needs. And that has been at least the experience, I think, at Open Door. And then that you want to have a smaller space where you can have sort of 2 people or 3 people, or 4 people gather, so that it doesn't feel like you're like on stage in some huge gymnasium. And so theirs are extremely intentional. Whereas, to be honest, this 112 one is effectively, 19 traditional, no. Let me think about this. 19, no, maybe 29 traditional units, but anyway, it's a certain number of traditional units, each of which have 6 bedrooms. And the common spaces, there is a common space that is, I guess, at the margin compared to traditional developers in these big buildings. They tend to build these like airport lounge kind of spaces where they imagine people going and watching sporting events, but which are not intimate and cozy. So Common has what they call the pajama rule, which is that you should feel comfortable in any common space in your pajamas. And so they design them to feel more like living rooms and less like, airport lounges. And then there's a lot of shared open space on the roof because it's LA and you can, be outside. And I think particularly during COVID, it's been relevant to be able to connect with neighbors, in what feels like a safer environment. So I know that was a very long answer, Raquel, but happy to dive in more and happy to chat through, floor plans and stuff.
Okay, no, that's brilliant. Thank you ever so much.
Connor's heard that pitch before, so sorry, Connor, to jump in there on.
Oh, no, totally. Thanks for coming on, definitely. Naomi will throw it over to you.
Thanks for doing that, Tony. Much appreciated. So I think, we've got 1 minute left.
Got 1 minute left, and I think we've got one question.
Oh, no. Oh, sorry, it's gone. All right, too late. So,
Hey, Kate, you're in London? Are you in London, Kate, at the moment?
Yeah.